A space mission has blasted off, taking people into orbit around the North and South Poles for the very first time. Leading that mission is pilot Rabea Rogge. The engineer and polar researcher has become the first German woman in space. She's hoping the research on board will help enable future distant space travel, perhaps one day even to Mars. But she also wants to be an inspiration to other women and girls who may have seen space as a man's world.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff.
It is the first mission of its kind. This SpaceX rocket is carrying humans into space to cover both polar regions. The launch is also making history as the first time a German woman is travelling into space. Ahead of the mission, polar scientist and astronaut Rabea Rogge says she hopes her journey will inspire others.
I hope that by now, having a woman in Germany who is also an astronaut, perhaps young women and girls will have a role model if they have doubts or if they are doubted. I have often experienced that then they can say, hey, OK, someone has done this before me, I can do it too.
Women comprise around 11% of the astronauts who have ever travelled into space. But times are changing, and the European Space Agency insists that gender doesn't play a role in the selection process.
That's a trend that I'm pushing forward, because for me it's important that the quality of the people is high and not whether they're male or female. It's all about the quality.
Rogge is joined on board by 3 crew members, including crypto billionaire Chun Wang, who funded the trip. During the mission, they will undertake over 20 experiments, including investigating the effects of space travel on the human body.
And we can speak now to Claudia Kessler. She's an aerospace engineer and the founder of a private company which supports female astronauts. Welcome to DW, Claudia. Thanks so much for joining us today. Can I start by asking you why it's taken so long for a German woman to travel to space?
Yeah, that's a good question, which we all ask ourselves. When I was 4 years old, I saw the moon landing on TV, and it was always my personal dream to become an astronaut. I never imagined that I would turn 50 years old and even more, and no German woman has still flown to space. So part of it, it's a political non-decision, let's say, in Germany. It's also, in total, the space world is still a very, very male-dominated world. And these are the 2 factors that cause the effect that up to now, up until yesterday, no German woman has been in space.
Mm-hmm. It is your company's goal to put the first German woman onto the International Space Station. Again, why hasn't that happened yet? And when do you see that happening?
Yeah, we started, I started a private astronaut selection with my company in 2016. So that's already 9 years ago now. And we had more than 400 fantastic applicants and selected 2 astronauts, which we also trained to go into space. We then also first tried to put together a commercial mission, but we were not able to convince companies in Germany to support the space mission for a woman. So we tried with the government. And again, everybody was excited about it. Everybody told us what great things we are doing, but nobody was able to find the budget, to tear out the budget for the flight to space.
The mission that Rabea Rogge, the female German astronaut, is funded by a cryptocurrency billionaire. It's carried out by a private company. Are commercial space flights like this helpful in terms of putting more women in space?
It's sure helpful for the visibility. Everybody's talking about it right now, and everybody's excited about it in Germany as well. The backside is and we've done that a lot, going to schools, talking to young children, especially girls, exciting them about spaceflight, exciting them about technology. And then you need to have a, let's say, professional astronaut as a role model, because if in the end the answer to the question, how can I go to space, is you have to find a Chinese multimillionaire, it's, from my point of view, not the right answer.
Okay, so what would your message be then, Claudia, to girls, young women who hear about this and who think, oh, I'd love to go to space? What words of encouragement would you have for them?
Well, they would have to study hard, and they would have to realize that only a very small percentage, even if you apply as a real astronaut, as a professional astronaut, let's say, only a very small percentage is selected and will go to space. But there are so many exciting jobs in the space field, cooperating worldwide and discovering new worlds and working with scientific instruments in space, even from planet Earth. That, I mean, how I also did in the end in my career. I mean, it's a fascinating job, even if you don't go to space in the very end.
Claudia Kessler, thank you so much for your time and for joining us here on DW. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Let's bring in Jill Stewart here. She's an expert in outer space politics, ethics, and law based at the London School of Economics. Thanks for being with us. Jill, this Fram2 mission, it's carrying the first German woman into space, as we mentioned. How well represented are women in the field of space science and exploration?
So space science and exploration has traditionally been a field that was dominated by men, but we are seeing many more women employed. That's partly as women in general enter into more study around STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But we're also seeing that the space industry, as it grows and there's more money and more jobs, that there's the opportunity for people from diverse backgrounds to be entering into this field. So business, law. There's somebody on board this mission that has a background in filmmaking. So there's a growth in jobs in general, and we're seeing more women enter into that field.
Just before we came on air, I was looking at some statistics suggesting that only about 10% of astronauts are women so far. What are the obstacles for women to become an astronaut?
That's right. So there's been about 660 people who have gone into space. I say about because there's some variation in how we define what makes an astronaut, depending on how high up you have to go. But about 660, and about 75 of those have been women. Now, traditionally, astronauts tended to be hired from a military background, so military pilots, which was disproportionately men. So that was probably the biggest barrier historically, as well as structural bias against women in the field. There really are no particular health blocks for this, and so I think we're going to see more and more women taking on the activity.
Now, this particular mission is funded by a cryptocurrency billionaire, and it's carried out by a private company. Are commercial space flights of this kind beneficial to the goal of bringing more women into space?
That's a very good question. And there is a lot of debate about what impacts space tourism will have, the environmental implications. For example, you hear people talking about space becoming a billionaire playground as it becomes a location for extreme tourism. But it definitely does also open up the potential for people, again, from more diverse backgrounds to go into space, not necessarily through what was the traditional route, which was to be a government-employed astronaut, but rather to go privately paid. So there are pros and cons to the industry that are still being debated.
We're seeing a movement towards the private sector when it comes to space technology. What advantages, disadvantages do you see there in commercial spaceflight in general?
In general, there is huge demand for building up the space infrastructure. We rely on space day to day, a lot more than we have in decades past, which I think people are increasingly aware of. But there are also concerns about things like, for example, space debris. So as we put up more and more objects in space, we are potentially cluttering our orbit. As I said, there are environmental concerns about rocket fuel and so on. And I think we also need to think about equality of access. So the degree to which which certain companies and countries may come to dominate this area, which is meant really to be for the common heritage of mankind.
Jill, thank you very much. That was Jill Stewart, an expert in outer space politics.